I knocked twice out of habit, though they'd told me I didn't need to. The door was already unlocked and I pushed it open with my elbow, careful not to drop the roast I'd been basting since morning. The scent of garlic and thyme filled the hallway behind me. Balanced on top of the foil-covered dish was a homemade apple pie, still warm from the oven. In my other hand, a small box, gift-wrapped with the same gold ribbon I used on Darren's birthday gifts when he was little. 38 years of tying bows, and my fingers still remembered. Their voices floated from the dining room. "Did you light the candles?" Sienna asked. Darren mumbled something I couldn't quite catch, then clear as glass shattering. "Who let that old woman in?" I froze, just inside the threshold. My shoes still damp from the front step. There was a silence, then the clatter of silverware. Darren didn't answer. He didn't defend me, didn't correct her. Just the hum of ambient music from the speaker near the kitchen, cheerful and empty. I stared at the hallway rug, beige, slightly frayed at the corner. I'd bought it for them 2 years ago at a clearance sale. Said it would warm the space. I remember Sienna barely looked up from her phone when I laid it out. I walked into the kitchen and set the roast down quietly, took the ribboned gift from under my arm and placed it beside their wine glasses. They didn't turn to greet me, didn't rise from the table, didn't even pause their conversation. I sat in the farthest chair, ate in silence, smiled once when they mentioned the weather. Sienna talked about their upcoming trip. Darren commented on wine pairings. They never asked where I'd been that morning or how my back was feeling. I could have been a hired server or a ghost, and it wouldn't have changed a thing. After dessert store-bought cake, nothing homemade, I stood and gathered my coat. No one offered a hug. Outside, I held the car door open for a moment, just breathing. Then I drove home and pulled the folder from the cabinet, the one with Darren's name on the deed and mine in the margins. It didn't always feel like this. There was a time not too long ago when I had a key to the front door, and I used it without guilt. I used to live there in the guest room at the end of the hall. A modest space, but it was warm, and it was mine. Darren had invited me after my back surgery, said I shouldn't be alone during recovery, said there would always be room. Then came the remodel. At first they said it was to open the space. We need more light. Sienna told me walking through the house with swatches and Pinterest boards. Then the room I slept in became a future nursery, even though they weren't trying for another baby. The furniture shifted and my things were boxed up for now. I was offered a storage bin in the garage. Darren promised it was temporary. That was 3 years ago. Now, when I visit, I don't come through the front door. That's Sienna's rule. Something about keeping the mud from the garden off the hardwood. I don't garden, but I nodded anyway. They installed a keypad on the side door next to the trash bins. Darren texted me the code once and told me to call ahead just in case. In case what I asked. He laughed like it was nothing, said sometimes they're not home or they're not in the mood. Last Christmas, I brought over a batch of cinnamon rolls, fresh, still warm. I hadn't called first. I thought it would be a nice surprise. Sienna opened the side door just enough to see me, then said, "It's not a good time, Corliss. Text next time, okay." I remember holding the tray, the scent of sugar and butter going cold in my hands. That was the first time I left something on their porch and walked away without knocking. Now, when I think of that house, I don't picture warmth or family. I picture entry codes and locked cabinets. I picture rooms I paid for filled with voices that no longer include mine. And I picture the drawer where I keep the original deed still untouched. I used to believe love was measured in how much you were willing to give without being asked. I gave Darren everything I could, and more than I should have. There were the years I worked nights hemming drapes and mending sleeves for extra cash just to cover his tuition. I remember coming home with my fingers raw and cracked, falling asleep at the kitchen table while grading my own sewing patterns. He never asked for it. I never waited for thanks. That's just what mothers do, I told myself. When he called from his second year of college, panicked about an unexpected fee, I wired money I didn't have. Canceled a dental appointment I'd already rescheduled twice. I told him not to worry. He didn't. Then came the business loan. He wanted to start a small landscaping company with two of his friends. The bank wouldn't approve them outright. Darren called me embarrassed. I sold my mother's engagement ring the next day. The jeweler barely looked me in the eye when he handed me the check. I mailed it to Darren with a card that said, "Bet on yourself." The ring had been in a box in my dresser for decades, but still, it was the only thing my mother left me. I told myself it was just a thing, that Darren's future meant more. When Darren and Sienna wanted to buy the house, they didn't have a down payment. I offered it half my retirement fund, no questions asked. We closed the sale under Darren's name because he said it would help his credit. He told me, "Don't worry, Mom. It's your home too." I believed him. Now, when I sit on their porch, I feel like a tenant without a lease. When I use the side door, I do it like someone sneaking in. I'm not part of their life anymore. I'm a complication they tolerate. The house is in his name. But the check that bought it? That came from me. And as I reached for the deed, that night fingers brushing over the signature line, I remembered exactly how much I'd signed away. The pie sat untouched in the passenger seat the whole way home. I'd made it this morning apple with a hint of cinnamon, just the way Darren liked it when he was 10. He hadn't even looked at it. I didn't cry on the drive back. My hands stayed steady on the wheel. I turned the radio off. Let the silence ride with me. When I got home, I carried the pie inside, placed it on the counter, and didn't bother unwrapping it. I went straight to the file cabinet in my bedroom closet. It took a few minutes to find the right folder. Thick yellowed from time labeled in my own handwriting, house, transfer documents. I hadn't opened it since the day we signed the papers. That afternoon had been full of so much trust, I didn't think I'd ever need to look again. But that night, I sat down with the folder and a cup of coffee turned on the old lamp by the sofa and began reading. Halfway through the third page, it was there. Reversion clause, in the event of undue pressure or intent to mislead. Grantor retains legal occupancy rights unless otherwise revoked. I read the words 3 times to be sure. It felt like finding a door I didn't know I had the key to. They thought I handed it over out of generosity. And I had, but they also assumed I'd never revisit the terms. That I didn't know what I signed. That I didn't remember, but I did. I remembered the conversation with the notary. I remembered asking for that clause, not for protection then, but for principle. Darren had laughed at me when I insisted. "You really think I'm going to kick you out someday, Mom?" I hadn't thought so. Not then. I closed the folder and laid it on the table beside my coffee. And the next morning, I made a call. I hadn't thought I'd ever need to make. Luann answered on the second ring. "Corliss Mercer?" she said, like she'd just been waiting for me to call. Same voice. Warm, steady. It had been over a decade since I'd last heard it, but nothing about her sounded different. "I need to ask you something," I said. "About the house? About the paperwork from when we transferred the title to Darren?" She didn't hesitate. "I still have it," she said. "It's all digitized now, but I kept your file in hard copy too. You wanted a clause for protection." I remember. I closed my eyes and let the words land. "You remember the clause?" I asked. "Yes. Undue duress. Life occupancy. Reversion option. You insisted on it." He rolled his eyes at the time. Remember, I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. He said, "What's the point of that? It's not like I'm going to throw her out." She paused. "But you wanted it in writing." I did. Luann's voice softened. "You can reverse it, Corliss. You don't even need to give them notice. The title reverts back to you on filing. Clean. Quiet. You just need to sign and show legal cause. Emotional coercion counts if we document it. I didn't speak for a moment. My hands were still my heart, oddly calm. I thought I'd feel guilt or even fear. Instead, I felt something I hadn't in months, maybe years. Stillness. Not numbness, not sorrow, just stillness. "Can you prepare it?" I finally asked. "I already am," she said. "You taught me to file in advance, remember? That made me smile." After the call, I sat alone with my coffee growing cold beside me. Outside, the leaves were starting to fall. I watched them drift slow and soft. They'd made me feel like a visitor in my own legacy. But the law hadn't forgotten me, and neither had Luann. By the time the paperwork arrived, I'd already started clearing out the drawer where I kept family photos, because the next time I walked through that house, it wouldn't be to visit. It would be to decide what stayed and what didn't. I waited until Thursday morning when I knew they'd both be at work. I still had the keypad code. They never thought to change it. Maybe they assumed I'd never use it again. Maybe they forgot I still remembered the numbers. The door clicked open with a soft beep, and I stepped into the entryway like a stranger breaking into her own memory. The air smelled like citrus cleaner and expensive perfume. Nothing like the cinnamon I used to simmer on the stove during fall. The walls had been repainted, white, glossy, sterile. Every photo on display was curated wedding portraits, vacation smiles, ultrasound images, even their dog in a Halloween costume. Not one of me. Not even the one of Darren as a boy sitting on my lap, grinning through 2 missing front teeth. That one used to sit on the mantel. Gone now. I walked the house slowly, not to take inventory, just to see what had been erased. My sewing machine was no longer in the den. The small bookshelf I'd donated was now hidden behind a cabinet. The guest room, the one they called mine, had a treadmill in it, and 2 boxes marked winter coats. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I just walked, touched the door frames, pressed my fingers to the windowsills I once scrubbed clean every spring. It felt less like a home and more like a museum, with no plaque bearing my name. At 3 o'clock, Sharp the realtor arrived. She was younger than I expected and efficient. She didn't ask many questions, just walked the halls with her phone out, snapping quiet photos. She admired the layout, praised the flooring, complimented the open space. I nodded along, answering when needed, but mostly I let her do her job. By the time she left, the listing was drafted and scheduled to go live by sundown. Cash offers only, quick closing preferred. I locked the door behind her and stood on the porch for a moment, looking at the house from the outside. And then I stepped off the stoop, knowing the next time they walked through that front door, they'd be walking into a house that no longer belonged to them. The offer came the following Monday. Full price. Cash. No contingencies. The buyer wanted a quick close and didn't even ask for a showing. The realtor called me surprised. I wasn't. I signed everything the same afternoon. No ceremony, no hesitation, no guilt. There was nothing left of me in that house. Nothing to pack, nothing to claim. Every piece of furniture had been bought by Darren and Sienna after I moved out. The photos were theirs. The curtains were hers. Even the dishes I'd once bought at a thrift store were long gone, replaced with designer sets I'd never been invited to eat from. So I didn't say goodbye. I let myself in one final time, with the code, walked through the quiet kitchen, and placed a small handwritten note on the counter. Pantry door sticks. The dogwood blooms in May. Enjoy. That was it. No bitterness, no signature, just facts, just truth. Then I locked the door and walked away. I wasn't leaving the house, not really. That had happened a long time ago. I was leaving the role they had written for me, the silent giver, the grateful guest, the invisible weight they carried with forced politeness. They pushed me to the margins, and now those margins had become the edges of a contract. Legal. binding. Final. I drove home without looking back. The sky was pale, cloudless. My apartment was still and small and quiet, but when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Owned. Not the space, but the choice. The name on the lease was mine. The furniture, modest as it was, had been chosen by me. The walls were bare, but they were honest. I set my bag down, made a cup of coffee, and listened to the quiet. And while they were still sitting in that house, unaware of what had shifted beneath their feet, I was already making peace with the next chapter. The first call came just after 5. Darren. I let it go to voicemail. The second one came 5 minutes later, then a third, then a string of text messages. The last one just said, "What did you do? You sold the house?" I didn't respond. Sienna's messages came next. Less surprise, more fury. "This is disgusting. You had no right. We have a baby Corliss." That last one made me pause. Not because it hurt, but because it was the first time she'd used my name in months. I made myself dinner, just a sandwich, and let the phone buzz out its tantrum. When it finally stopped, I put it in the drawer. By the next morning, they had reached out to the realtor, who confirmed what they clearly never thought to question: the house was legally mine again. The sale had closed. The new owners had already scheduled a walkthrough and intended to move in within the week. They were offered a lease, short-term, month to month, triple what they were paying on the mortgage. I never heard if they accepted, but I did hear from Darren again. This time it was a voicemail. His voice was smaller, tighter. "Mom, I didn't know you still had rights to it. We just thought—" He didn't finish the sentence. Maybe because he didn't know what they thought. Maybe because they never thought at all. It was never about revenge. If I wanted that, I would have shown up in person. I would have demanded an apology shouted back when they made me small. But that's not who I am. They forgot me because it was convenient. They remembered me when it became expensive. I didn't call back. I didn't need to. Everything I needed to say was already written in the silence they never respected. And as I watched the sun rise through my living room window, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, I knew the only thing left was the moment Darren would ask to see me in person. He asked to meet at the cafe near the old post office, the one we used to visit when he was in high school before Sienna, before everything got too complicated for simple things like coffee and conversation. I got there early. I always do. Chose a corner table by the window, ordered my usual, and sat with my hands wrapped around the mug, letting the heat settle into my fingers. Darren arrived 7 minutes late. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with work or age. He sat across from me without ordering anything. "I didn't know," he said. I waited. "I didn't think you'd actually—" He trailed off, ran a hand through his hair. "Sienna's furious. She feels betrayed." I raised an eyebrow. He noticed. "I'm not saying she's right. Look, things have been stressful. With the baby, with work. We weren't trying to push you out. It wasn't like that." I said nothing, stirred my coffee slowly, let the silence stretch. He sighed. "Why would you do this? Why not just talk to me?" I looked him in the eye, steady and calm. "You didn't let me in, Darren. Not to your house. Not to your life. So I let myself out, and I took the house with me." His jaw tensed. He looked down at his hands. No defense, no fight, just quiet. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. I nodded. "That's the problem. You didn't think. You assumed." We sat like that for a long moment. No yelling, no drama. Just two people separated by years of decisions and unspoken things. He finally stood. "I don't know what to say." "You said enough when you didn't say anything," I replied. He left without finishing his sentence, and I stayed with my coffee watching the late morning light stretch across the table. And when my phone buzzed with a message from Sienna minutes later, I didn't even need to open it to know what it was about. The morning light was soft against the glass, and the coffee tasted just right strong with a hint of cream. I sat by the window in my apartment. I'd started working on a new quilt the night before. No deadline, no recipient. Just fabric I liked and colors that spoke to me. It had been years since I'd sewn something for myself. Years since I'd chosen a pattern without asking someone else's opinion first. The phone buzzed beside me. "Darren, we're moving. Thought you'd want to know." I read it once, then again. There was no anger in the words, no guilt either. Just a simple update like I was some distant relative they remembered to notify out of obligation. I didn't reply. Not out of spite. Not out of pride. Just because there was nothing left to say. They would move. They'd find another house, maybe smaller, maybe further from downtown. Maybe one with fewer reminders of what they'd lost. Or maybe they'd carry those reminders with them no matter where they went. I took another sip of coffee, then turned back to my machine. The fabric waited patiently, soft and precise beneath my hands. I pressed the pedal and let the needle do its work, stitching clean lines through layers of material I had chosen. For no one but me. It wasn't silence I had been searching for all along. It was clarity. They used to say I was the heart of the family. Then they said I was too much. Then too quiet. Then unnecessary. But the truth is, I hadn't changed at all. I had just stopped giving. Stopped bending. Stopped waiting to be invited in. And if that made me a stranger in their eyes, so be it. Because in this quiet space I'd built for myself, thread by thread, word by word, I had finally remembered who I was. And this time, no one would get to write me out.